Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 22nd. April 22nd of 2020, and time for yet another show. We are scanning the skies and scanning the Twitter machines and all the other inputs that we've got here to try to figure out what is the big story of the morning. Of course, we'll have help with that, thankfully, from Greg Dworkin, who has been culling those stories actively. And we'll bring you his perspective on these things. We are flying blind at the moment, but I think the president is up in anger tweeting about something this morning, so we'll check in on that. I believe he has instructed the United States military to win a war while you weren't looking, so that's good news. I don't know, there's something going on. We'll have to check in on it, but apparently he's issuing orders to the United States Navy. Well, this is interesting. He's issuing orders for them to shoot down Iranian gunboats. Now, that's not ordinarily something that we do with boats. We do, of course, shoot at them, and I guess you could say we shoot a boat up when we blast it full of holes. But, well, shoot down is usually something we talk about in terms of planes, of course. And I assume we'll probably shoot down a couple of those as well, just for fun. But just so you know, he's instructed the United States Navy to take care of that and make sure that you shoot all those things up, down, what have you, whatever direction you want to send them. It doesn't really matter from our perspective. I guess just so long as they're shot and we all get to cheer about that. That seems like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if there's any provocations happening. We'll check in on it, I guess, just to be up to date. I don't think that, well, who knows? Do you want to place any bets about whether or not he starts a war in the middle of a pandemic? I don't know. It's up to you to make that decision. All right, yeah, he's been up for a little while and tweeting, probably in anger because that's what he does for 2 hours now. And let's see, been watching Fox and Friends, and he's happy that they've been covering the economic impact of COVID-19. Do you think that's an interesting topic? You should probably look into that. And then, of course, he will be signing an executive order today prohibiting immigration. Didn't he say the other day that he did that already, or was he hinting that it would be something coming down the pike? I don't know. We'll check in on that one. And, and a happy birthday wishes to Cindy Adams of the New York Post. 90 years old, but always looks 39 to me because he can't see. And that's terrific. And I guess congratulations and whatever. But one of his favorite gossip columnists to whom he used to feed tips all the time as John Barron and the other various fake names he would assume how Cindy Adams was always kept in the dark that it was actually him. I have no idea. Other news from him. States are coming back. We're going to open for business again soon. And then I have instructed the United States Navy to shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats if they harass our ships at sea. Which, okay, we'll see. That sometimes happens, I'm sure. And I assume that they'll probably ram the ramparts once they're done and do whatever they have to do in order to take over the airports. In fact, way back when, as the United States military did back in the 1700s. And, he's keeping up to date with things. Lots to watch here today. Let's see. In our own backyard here, we have Bill's morning tweet. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Let's find out what the hell's going on around here. Why not? Listen in as Kagro X, me, David Waldman, and senior military advisor Greg Dworkin, Dem from Connecticut, on Twitter, discuss their totally secret plans to swoop in and take over North Korea. Ow. I thought you were going to say Iran and that the surprise wouldn't be spoiled. But now, of course, well, yeah, it's a good time to swoop in even and take over North Korea. The other day, rumors were floating that Kim Jong Un was, kept saying gravely ill or in grave danger. Is there any other kind? No one knows. But we're not sure what kind of shape he's in. But they're a secretive country, and also I'm not certain we care exactly who runs it. But I'm sure there's better and there's worse. Anyway, spoiler alert in here. It says it involves sharks with lasers. So, Greg, I hope you brought one or the other. A lot of sharks with lasers, so I hope you brought a good supply. I forgot which one I picked, so I will get on Amazon.com and get either the sharks or the lasers, depending on what you brought. Good morning.
Good morning. So I don't know who said it on the internet, but it's absolutely true. The headline really has to be Kim Jong, ill. And, because we don't know. I mean, nobody knows.
Right. Well,
but this is like,
out.
the old days with the watching the Russian, leader. He hasn't been seen. He has been seen. I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's always been true. I think I remember from my youth some picture of one of the North Korean dictators, one of the Kims, with his head above, or maybe that was the Chinese. That was Mao Zedong with his head above water, treading water, and the only thing you saw was a lake and then his head. Oh. And it was meant to show that no, he's still alive. He's still here. He's still healthy. Look, he's out swimming.
Right. Well, I mean, you would see that if he were out swimming. Was there a fishing line from the top of his head?
You couldn't tell.
Screen?
And the whole thing was staged. But the Russians and the Chinese used to do that all the time back in Cold War days. And North Korea is kind of a throwback, so nobody really knows what's going on.
Well, no, but we'll see what we can find out.
We do know what's going on in terms of Trump's political stuff. Pandemic is pandemic, and there are people like Brian Kemp who are making some really terrible decisions, making Ron DeSantis's only partially bad decisions about reopening the economy, pretty clear. The funny thing about Brian Kemp trying to open up Georgia is that everybody is dumping on him, saying, you just don't want to pay unemployment.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. Lots of people saying it.
And so if you tell people it's okay to, go get your hair cut and just go bowling, who cares? But people don't really want to go get their hair cut. I think somebody asked Debbie Burks about that, and psychopath that she is. She said something about, well, you used long shears or something. Just an awful performance by her. But as you know, I've not been a fan of hers for a long time. The point is, if people don't show up, then you haven't opened the goddamn thing.
I guess that's true. You actually have to go and pay people in order for it to become an economy.
Well, customers have to go and buy. Yeah. And if they don't show up,
that's
you're done.
I mean. You have to go and pay for what you're buying. I mean, if no one wants what you're selling, then you're closed, not open.
Yeah, pretty much. So, a lot going on. And if Trump wants to start a war, it's because all of that is happening, and the politics of it for him are just terrible. For example, this morning's Navigator series, they're doing a Tuesday through Saturday posting of their current tracker. And Nick Orvich pollster has some new news today. Day 22 of the Navigator survey tracking poll, the political fallout for the protests at state capitals lies squarely with those who are egging them on. The American people support the governor's stay-at-home orders by a landslide. 77% support them, and just 14% support the protesters.
Okay. That's pretty
support for governors over the protesters, it says. And as the president blames, distracts, and sympathizes with those who are flaunting those widely supported guidelines, his approval rating on the pandemic continues to fall. Okay, a week ago, it was a 50-47 disapproved. Now it's 53-43, which is a pretty big gap. If you follow along on that thread that I gave you, you will see that. Your readers will see it when we post the roundup links.
Yes, Nick
later on. There's the actual picture. And the president can't just lie over this crisis, as too many have firsthand experience. Across the 7,749 interviews we've conducted since March 20th, those who know somebody infected give worse ratings. It's not just the where the disease is thing, as the trend holds with independents and the GOP. And we saw that in Washington state, which was one of the first hit, as Trump's numbers there cratered. What happened is that Democrats became rabid Trump disapprovers. Independents started to look more like Democrats. And Republicans started to look more like independents. So what happens is that when the virus hits and you start to know people who are sick, and you either have experienced or read the stories about how it's so hard to see them in the hospital, or about your own care providers, or the people who are providing for the folks that you know are having trouble with personal protective equipment, and you can't get tested, or somebody you know can't get tested, none of the BS that they do on those rally press conferences every day work anymore.
Yes, well,
Those who know somebody sick, less likely to approve. If you know somebody who's affected, approval for Trump in terms of how he's handling his job as president is 40 and disapprove 58. That's a minus 18. Independents, if you know somebody infected, 27% approve, 66% disapprove. Whereas if you don't know somebody infected, it's 42-47. So minus 5 versus minus 69.
well, yes.
Okay, even
That's
Republicans know somebody infected, you have a 69% approval, a 69 point approval, 84-15 for the president. But if you don't know somebody, that actually is 89-10 or 79 points. So 10 points higher if you don't know somebody, 10 points lower if you do know somebody, even for the partisans on the Republican side. But for the independents, those are just awful numbers.
Yes.
Okay, and independents who don't know somebody infected are less negative than somebody who is. But what happens is over time, you start to know people who get infected. Nearly a third of Americans now know somebody infected.
They may be infected.
So that's, as Nick Orvich puts it, the right wing is used to rallying their side to 90% support levels on the culture wars. But that's hard when a third of Fox News watchers or a quarter of Fox News watchers know somebody as well. Meanwhile, economic worries are very real. And as with recession, a top worry.
Yes.
And the economic relief bills, one passed the Senate last night. The public is still clamoring for more. They want more action. There are no libertarians during a pandemic. No atheists in a foxhole, no libertarians in a pandemic. And there are concerns that Trump's economic response to the pandemic is favoring the wealthy over middle and working class people. When it first started on March 23rd, 42% felt that he was favoring the wealthy and 37% middle class. Those numbers are now 52-32. And, part of that, of course, is what happened with the PPP, which was the loan to small businesses. And what happened, the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, was supposed to support struggling small businesses. As Judd Lagoon points out, hundreds of recent SEC filings show that 32 companies that pay their CEOs $1 million or more scooped up PPP funds, including places like Harvard with billion-dollar endowment, multiple $1 billion endowment. How did that happen? Well, first of all, lawyers. And second of all, I mean, then that's not just a throwaway line. If you're a mom and pop business, you don't have a stable of lawyers who's ready to fill out all the forms and dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and then your accounting division, who may well be your wife or your husband, or your kid, or that's tech support. What's your payroll? Give me all the numbers and let me fill out these forms so I can apply for this money. You're not in a position to do that. No. Whereas the $1 million companies, the ones who pay their CEOs $1 million or more, I mean, they can just hire people to go ahead and fill out these forms and get ready for it. And they've been scouting what you need to do. So the moment that the ability to apply for it goes live, all of a sudden they're there. You can't compete with that.
Right.
That's one part of it. The other part is that the way it was read, I don't know if this is the way it was written or how it was interpreted, but Shake Shack, of course, is a famous example. If you employ many people, but you do it in franchise spots so that each individual franchise has less than 500 employees, you are eligible. So, you could say, well, I own McDonald's, but each one of the McDonald's is small, so I'm going to do a small business loan.
Right. Or if you own, I don't know, the Trump organization, but it's divided up into 500 LLCs, each one controlling a unit in a building somewhere, well, there you go.
Right. So, the public, the general public, who isn't getting the funds because it dried up, and then reads that large corporations with $1 million a year CEOs are getting the money, that's simply not going to play well. That's all part of the politics.
Well, don't let anybody find out. How about that? Has you
Oh,
thought
too
about
late.
that?
Everybody now knows.
All right. Then what?
Then what? Well, there's
give
now,
more.
because we've now had enough sufficient time, an article in AP, Associated Press, at least 6 voters and 1 poll worker taking part in court-ordered in-person voting in Milwaukee now have coronavirus, officials say.
Okay.
At least 1 poll worker. And so who's responsible for that? They're going to hold the GOP responsible for that. I mean, don't kid yourself and say they won't.
Well, in Milwaukee, they should, you would think.
There's a number of reasons why the Democrats won that recent election by a much larger margin than people thought they would. One reason is that Ben Wickler, the relatively famous for a Democratic committee head in the state, you probably can't name most of them, but we can all name Ben. He's a very visible presence on Twitter and on social media, organized the Democrats for the mail-in voting to help counter what the Republicans were doing, and it worked. And so what happened is the Republicans lost that election, but they also lost the 2018 election. And according to all the polls, Trump is trailing Biden in a pretty significant and stable way in the 2020 election. And none of that is lost on Trump. He may not pay attention to science or pandemics, but he certainly pays attention to his polling. Josh Kraushaar, the conservative columnist for National Journal, tweeted, and this is in the Pundit Roundup, side of the Times, Hillary Clinton lost seniors by 7 points to Trump, 52 to 45. Biden is leading Trump with seniors by 9.
Yes.
52-43. That's quite a turnaround.
He's more senior.
Seniors are more concerned about health and the economy. Seniors are the people at risk from this pandemic.
Yes.
And the idea that Trump can just BS his way into getting past those numbers is ridiculous. He's in severe trouble.
Okay, good.
As Mitt Romney might say.
Oh, is that what it is? All right. Yeah, I think
severe.
he's probably
These are severe.
True.
I like Lamp. But the whole idea here is that that Trump can simply have these press conferences and then gloss over them, and then put together a 30-year experiment in trying to manipulate conservative voters and rally them not only around him, but around showing up in various and sundry states by the dozens in order to protest the closing of the state that the rest of the state actually wants, by governors far more popular in those states than Trump himself is. Exposing that is basically just another element of everything Trump touches dies.
You mean?
I mean, this is a finely tuned machine that works best when you hide it.
Yeah. All right. Well,
now you've exposed it, and so people are going to look at that and say, "Well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing this?
Why are we doing it? Are we doing it? We're not.
There's a bunch of people. You went over this yesterday on the show. I think we talked about it a little bit. That a handful of people were responsible for all of the Facebook sites trying to organize these protests. They fizzled. The first one got covered by the media in terms of, oh my goodness, look at the counter protests going on and they're growing. And then people figured out, wait a minute, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And by the way, there aren't a lot of people, and why are they doing this? And why do they all have the same website? And so today's Washington Post, if you go to their website, on page there, and I'll send it to you,
all right,
making it easy for you.
Shoo.
The anti-quarantine protest seems spontaneous, but behind the scenes, a powerful network is helping. The protests erupting over coronavirus restrictions are often coordinated and backed by longtime conservative activists whose organizations were built with funding from Republican megadonors. I don't think that was the story they were looking for. They were looking for grassroots response makes this a second Tea Party. That's what they were aiming at, not this.
Well, that certainly was the organizers' idea. I mean, it did work once.
Yeah, it worked once. Fool me once.
Yeah, I like the sign.
Shame on me. Fool me twice. I'm not going to get fooled again.
Huh. Give me liberty or give me COVID-19. That is not a clever sign. I've seen it a couple times, and it doesn't have a ring to it. I'll say that. And also, you can have both, and whatever. I don't know.
Meanwhile, we have reports that the anti-malarial drug that Trump touted is linked to higher rates of death in the VA virus study. That's a Veterans Administration. We have the CDC director warning a second wave of virus in the fall is likely to be even more devastating than this one.
Yeah, he'll get fired in that one.
We have first U.S. virus deaths earlier than previously thought. That was in California. And, there's a lot of interest in trying to explain the unexplainable. And people are just very uncomfortable with saying we really don't know. But the question on the table is how come it didn't spread in California and it spread so, as Mitt Romney would say, severely in New York? And we don't know. And there's a lot of theories for that. Maybe it's a different strain of virus. Maybe it's the subways. Maybe it's masking in Seoul and other countries that help prevent the spread. Maybe it's something else altogether. All of those theories are out there. You can find a paper touting any one of these things. Maybe closing early really matters. Maybe even a week made a difference. We just don't know. But the difference between what's happening in Washington, California on the one hand, and New York and Connecticut and New Jersey on the other is pretty amazing. I'd like to think that density has part of it. I can't imagine 9 million people a day taking the subway has nothing to do with it. My San Francisco friends are really mad at me because I suggested that the San Francisco transit is kind of light compared to New York. Well, what do you mean? They said, we got 400,000 people a day taking this. Well, 9 million.
Yeah.
Packed together. I mean, it's just that it's an order of magnitude difference and I've taken both and I love both cities and it isn't a pissing match between East Coast and West Coast. They're different.
Yeah. Well, there are going to be great differences in the way they do everything and okay. I mean, don't worry.
We don't know. It probably wasn't just that because that alone wouldn't explain how come New York is bad and Seoul in South Korea was not bad.
Right. True. Also, well, there's lots of factors. Really, I don't know why you would get upset about that. You've done a good job in containing the virus.
You've insulted them by calling it light. I'll tell you why.
But you're all alive.
Because people who want mass transit to help save the environment are really ticked off that you are suggesting that mass transit may have anything to do with this whatsoever.
Well, maybe.
And this isn't a side discussion. One thing has nothing to do with the other. I'm not saying close down mass transit and don't do it. And the people who are anti-city, which is basically the Republican Party, love this discussion because they would like anything possible to discount and discredit urbanization. And that's what a lot of the pushback I'm getting is from, really. They won't say that, but that's really what it is. But that's not the point. The point is trying to figure out what's really going on here.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like an awfully silly thing to be upset about if you did a good job with the people dying and then find out, but now you're saying fewer people ride our subway. No, but so what? Now there's room for growth and plenty of it at 400,000 versus 9
There's also
million.
room for standing apart on the subway. As people ride them, but I don't know. There's so much we don't know. These are all really worth looking at. One of the funny things, though, is that the paper suggesting maybe it was the subways was an economist who was writing this.
Maybe it's the right.
And economists have come up with all sorts of different theories about everything, most of them wrong. And so all the non-economists are making fun of the economists for sticking your nose arrogantly into the epidemiology business. And so, that's part of it too. So, it's you can't separate the facts from the politics ever. You can't separate politics from policy. We know that. That's why we do both. And that's not a surprise.
Yeah, I guess not. Okay, I don't know. I think they should calm down there just a little bit. People hate being told that, but okay, good job.
People hate being at home too. So you got to have something to argue about.
All right. Well,
something better that people are doing. I don't know if you saw this. Is that the museum challenges? You get a famous picture, and then it's up to you at home to try to recreate it with your own resources.
Yeah, I've seen it, and I don't know what you're doing, people. But okay.
My favorite. Of course, is the hunt for the unicorn tapestries.
Oh, yes.
Right? That you could find at the cloisters or see them in various and sundry places. And they have a unicorn in a roundish kind of pen.
Yes.
A picket fence kind of thing. And somebody recreated that with their dog. And they made a little cone and stuck it on the poor dog's head. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture. It's very funny.
All right.
So, people have time on their hands, and this is what they're doing, and they're all going stir crazy. So it's not surprising that you see those things.
All right. Well, I'll be working on a Miro piece for you when I cook.
Actually, I think I found it. So let me see if I could send it to you.
Okay.
There it is.
Oh, look at that. That's very nice.
Yeah. So maybe you can put that in the roundup too. It's really kind of cute.
Sure. Where did it come from? Where is that? Let me see. Okay, I see the picture. Did you screenshot that? All right.
I screenshot that, but there's a whole list. I can give you the original tweet where I saw it.
You can concern yourself with that later if you like. I don't mean to distract, although we are coming up to the break. That would be a perfect time to do it. That is a nice cone. Is that has this person been saving it since getting cotton candy at the circus or something?
One never knows. Here is the tweet that all of that came from, so you can go look.
Right.
And when you post these tweets, you can't see the dual picture. This one is girl with pearl earring, but next to her is a dog dressed up to look exactly the same. Oh,
do you have to use a dog in it?
I don't know. But it's good.
Yeah, well done there. Because I was going to say
these are all animal
painting
pictures.
Of a girl with a pearl earring. Can you really?
Because those are the ones that are most interesting. I don't care if you look like the girl in the pearl earring, but if you could do it with a dog, that's you got that.
I thought that was too easy, but no, add a dog and it makes it all that much more challenging. Okay, I gotcha.
Right. Coming up to the break, Nancy Pelosi says Trump is, quote, an agent of distraction. He's an agent of chaos as well, saying he's avoiding the truth. This is true. Right. U.S. is deporting infected migrants back to vulnerable countries. So Trump, in the midst of tanking in the polls, decides he's going to declare a war on immigration. And then Iran, I guess he just threw in too because he couldn't help himself. Right. And there you have it. That's basically the headlines for what happens this morning.
Okay, well, very good. That is an awful lot happening here. I'm pleased to see what's happening with the dogs of America.
More on the Democrats when we get back.
All right. Yeah, we'll switch topics. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. Still in the middle of our roundup. As it turns out, there is more news than even that. I don't know what it's about, but okay. We can go and check it out.
Well, I was noticing this morning Jay Inslee is endorsing Joe Biden.
Yes, right. I did see
citing private conversations on climate policy. The governor of Washington State, one of the Democratic Party's most prominent environmentalists, urged progressives to get on board with the presumptive presidential nominee's campaign. A couple of observations about that. We already talked about the fact that Biden is winning with over 65s to sort of worried about dying.
Yes, our seniors.
But he's doing okay, relatively speaking, with the youth vote as well. The kids are all right. This is a piece from Fox News, of all places. Biden and the youth vote followed this model to win in November. Our Fox News voter analysis of Super Tuesday voters found Biden won only 15% of 18 to 29-year-olds that day and 21% of 30 to 39-year-olds. Mm-hmm. But like they say in ads for financial products, past performance does not necessarily predict future results.
True.
Okay. A review of recent elections shows that just because a candidate has a weakness with a particular group of primary voters doesn't mean he will be weak with the same group in the general election.
No.
Okay. So that's an important point. The warnings that Democrats have offered Biden in 2020 echo those that Obama received in 2008 from Hispanic Democrats, which turned out to be overstated. Okay. What explains why a candidate can fare poorly with a group in the primaries and win them by a landslide in the general, says the article? First, the November electorate is vastly different. The mix of candidates is different. And how will Biden perform among young voters in 2020? Well, we can only speculate. But in 2018, looking at the midterms, fine. Okay. Yes. The party broadly ignored Justice Democrats, one of the signers of the letter to Biden last week, issued a detailed report to make the case that you have to go for Medicare for all. And the party broadly ignored this advice, focusing on health care appeals on small bore issues like protecting the ban on insurance companies rejecting applicants for pre-existing conditions. Yes. And the Democrats' turnout strategy in 2018 was relying on anger towards Trump to motivate voters, otherwise known as negative partisanship, the Rachel Bitecofer model, and it worked. Democrats took back the majority, in large part by winning young voters 64-34. Oh. And midterm turnout reached unprecedented levels, and that's the model Biden should follow. Now, I've been making the case that Medicare for all has issues.
Yes.
But if you really, 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 really want to get younger voters, make climate your issue. And this is Jay Inslee saying, I've spoken with Biden. I'm fine with him in terms of what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And I would make the case that some of my purist friends have to understand that you're politically tone deaf if you do not understand that Joe Biden is relatively progressive and you can talk to him about stuff even when he disagrees with you.
Yes.
And that you got a reasonably decent chance of getting him to come around to your position if your position makes sense.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So I won't vote for him because he didn't agree with me in the primary is dumb. And by the way, most people don't think that way.
Shoo. Good. I'm glad, because that would be a problem. If most people were really just that dumb, well, you would have a problem. There's some residual anger, certainly, and then lots of people say, well, sure, now he's coming around because he wants to get my vote.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
That's also known as politics.
Yeah, and I don't just give my vote to people who say they agree with me.
Position, and if you don't take it, I don't know what I'm going to do. What are you going to do? Let Trump be the president? Are you happy with how he's doing? Of course, that's going to motivate most people. But for those who need to be motivated by policy, I'm telling you, Joe Biden is far from perfect, and the stuff he wants to do may not fit what you want to do, but you can talk to him about it. And he is the quintessential, probably apocryphal story of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I agree with you, and that make me do it.
Yeah, well, it's a good model, and this is not unusual. And people need some time to be upset about not winning the way they wanted to win. And it's early days, and pretty soon it starts to shift. And then when the November date approaches, and they say, all right, now is the time to register your choice. People say, fine.
Now, remember, Inslee is also dealing with the pandemic, Washington having been an early hit state. Mm-hmm. I've had to deal with a totally dishonest person in the White House, Mr. Inslee said, predicting that Mr. Biden would be a better partner for governors in both parties. In addition to the endorsement, Mr. Inslee participated in another ritual of Mr. Biden's lockdown era. On Tuesday, he recorded an episode for Mr. Biden's podcast. Here's the deal.
Mr. Biden's podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Wasn't that a movie?
It's a beautiful day in the... Yep. Mm-hmm. It will be.
Yeah. Mr. Blandings builds his dream house. Mr. Biden builds a podcast. Here's the deal, which had previously featured conversations with Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer, and, of course, we have Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris in the Veep Stakes mix.
Are they in the podcast?
Well, I don't know, but everybody's speculating about who Biden's going to pick,
all right.
Which is, I suppose, a hot topic of conversation if you got nothing else to do, and we don't. But at the same time,
right. That's true.
It's really Biden versus Trump, and everything else is secondary. And again, I've made the case it's not so much who he picks for VP, although that's important because of his age, and he may only run once, and you have to look to the future. And by the way, you really want somebody who complements and who can work with him, but also brings stuff to the table that he doesn't. All of that's true.
It's fun. It's news.
But it's still Biden versus Trump, and we're in the middle of a pandemic and a recession depression. And somebody said to me, if depression comes after recession, then what comes after depression? Of course, I had an answer for that. a new deal.
Yeah, well, that's historically the case once.
Right. And so, if that's what we're talking about here, those are going to be the absolute driving issues, not who we pick for VP. That'll be another thing that if you didn't get your choice, you'll be mad about, that isn't going to make or break the election in November.
All right. All right, well, it's a fun thing to do, and it's new content. I mean, basically is what it comes down to.
By the way, Ron Klain had a nice observation here. I have this in the Pundit Roundup. He said, the next time one of those protesters says that stay-at-home orders are un-American, inform them that George Washington imposed a quarantine in 1775 to prevent smallpox.
Yeah. Well, he did. they don't care, but he did.
Apple pie.
One of the protesters that I don't know where this one was, but one of the protests produced video of somebody, I guess, dressed up as what I assume they thought looked maybe a little bit like, I don't know, some sort of robot George Washington. I don't know what was going on, but there he was with the big assault rifle and I guess, what he thought was sort of colonial era garb and maybe a Washington looking mask of some kind, until somebody pointed out that it was actually like a adult sized Beauty and the Beast Halloween costume is what it actually was. So he's French, wow. I guess. But it was very interesting seeing that this interesting cosplay for a gun rally. I'd not seen that one before. I don't know. If
I got three more items to give you. And
I'll take those instead. Yeah. The George Washington.
This is a random one. I don't know who this fellow is, but I liked it, so I stuck it in the roundup. They're all in the Pundit Roundup, one right after the other. And it's a tweet by a fellow named J. All Felder, Ulfelder.
Oh.
Summarizing what I had told you, and therefore, obviously, I think he's brilliant.
Genius, yes.
Genius guy. I find it odd that U.S. election forecasters continue to discuss the 2020 cycle as if all the usual assumptions will hold. Maybe they will, but between the pandemic and the GOP's cutthroat approach to retaining power, I think there's much more uncertainty than usual. And so for those of you putting together an economic model explaining why Trump will win or won't win, or what's his name, Alan Lichtman's 17 keys to the kingdom, or whatever he calls his odd job, predictive model.
Yes.
It's different this year. Things are happening. Trump is not the favorite, even though he's the incumbent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The pandemic matters. It hits people hard. The recession, depression matters. It's different than 2016. This is not 2016. So I like that. So I just thought I'd emphasize that.
I think it's true. It works. I did see something circulating yesterday, a weird punditry about, I guess, the Wisconsin situation, as we're now finding out people were getting coronavirus, waiting in line or working at the polls, etc.
The thing we were afraid of, because poll workers tend to be elderly.
Right, and they have to just sit there and let everybody come in and
I wonder why the elderly don't like Trump at this point.
I don't know. We ought to poll them, and quick at that. But someone saying, that their pundit style take on things was that the results of the mail-in ballots, the absentee balloting in Wisconsin, stand the previous presumption that mail-in voting, I guess among political scientists, has no partisan bias on its head, and really,
that was Reed Epstein, who basically tweeted a story that said the fact that the mail-in ballots favored Democrats, and the word he used, upended years of research showing that mail-in ballots tend to be nonpartisan. But it's nonpartisan if you add up all the ballots all over the country in a 50-50 nation. If you look at an individual state, that's not necessarily the case. You have mail-in ballots, for example, in Florida that might be both from military and from retired that favor the GOP. That happens to be true in the state of Florida. But when you look at the country as a whole, no, because things tend to even out. In this particular case, as we went over, what happened is that the Wisconsin Democratic Party mobilized and rallied and organized the Democratic voters to go ahead and do mail order. That doesn't upend anything. It doesn't change a thing.
No, it does. I thought the whole thing was rather absurd. I mean, obviously there's some context, and I mean, I suppose, like you said, some places that the mail-in ballots favor the Republicans, and it's because mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, are coming chiefly from military people deployed elsewhere in the country or overseas. And likewise, there's a reason why mail-in balloting in Wisconsin was composed the way it was composed. And it might have been, I don't know, the gigantic story about how it's a pandemic and everybody's been inside.
Or Robin Voss dressing in cosplay.
I guess. I couldn't believe.
Remember when he pretended to be a doctor?
Who? What? Who did?
Robin Voss, the GOP state legislator who put on the face mask and the gown and the gloves and told everybody it was completely safe to come out and vote.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, well, he was right. He was dressed up in all the PPE. It looked safe, didn't it?
Yeah, it was Dr. Cosplay, right?
Yeah, I guess. I was amazed that you could ignore
Why did
that
message
in your
not
analysis.
resonate? I don't get it.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it resonated with somebody, a bunch of people who stayed in and voted by mail. I just never... I couldn't believe that they were missing this. Like, this is why people were voting by mail this particular time. Did you not notice that there was a pandemic going on and that people were pissed, and the people who were reached by organizers early enough to remind them, if you don't want to go out and stand in that line, get yourself an absentee ballot. Of course, that's going to skew. It's certainly going to skew Democratic. Well, first of all, if it's the Democrats organizing them, because they're not going to knock on Republican doors and remind them. But on top of all that, people probably, as they were casting their ballots and mopping their brows and saying, "Phew, I'm glad I listened to the organizers and got myself something I could vote by mail with," and then watching the courts say, "All the rest of you have to go out and stand in line and risk coronavirus to vote." I'm sure that they said, they pressed a little extra hard with the pen, filling in the bubble, saying, "Get rid of these idiots." I can't believe that this wasn't part of his calculus. And I guess, as I put it yesterday, I mean, forcing people to suicide vote probably upended all the political science on suicide voting, of which there's none, because that's never been done before. And it's crazy to believe that something else was at play in the middle of this debacle. And no one's talking about anything else. This guy forgot there was a pandemic going on.
Pretty amazing. One other item here, G. Elliott Morris points out, there's a mountain of evidence that shows people who watched Fox News early during the COVID-19 outbreak were less likely to socially distance than others. Now we have evidence that counties with more Sean Hannity versus Tucker Carlson viewers have seen more cases and more deaths. Hannity downplayed it way more than Carlson did. And that's why they're making the distinction here. So if you're a Fox News watcher, it doesn't just matter that you watch Fox News and not, let's say, CNN or MSNBC. It matters whether you watched Hannity versus Carlson.
Who's on later?
I don't know. Oh, you'd have to watch Fox News to know that.
Offhand, I'm not sure. I
like to watch media, but there's some things that are just a step too far, a bridge too far. And then watching Hannity and Carlson and Laura Ingraham, I can't do it. I don't know sandwich.
Yeah, they have to split that job up among the media watchers. So I don't think anybody can take it all. I was curious. Because,
arguably, Hannity's the worst. Hannity's the dumbest, but Ingram's the worst because she's smart enough to know what she's doing.
Wow.
And Tucker Carlson is the least worst of the three. And so that's what this paper's looking at, particularly Hannity versus Carlson. And so you can show that if you were a heavy Carlson viewer, you had a different reaction than if you were a Hannity viewer. Now, how far you take that, I don't know, but it's awfully interesting. Awfully
okay. You're looking at an interesting subset of people who are awful themselves. And,
in the end, everybody catches up, though. You start getting coronavirus in your community, and you know people with Rona who died, and all of a sudden it doesn't matter which one you watch.
Oh, yeah. Dead people don't watch any of them. So I guess
a good piece from the New York Times, by the way, just to dampen some of the paranoia here. Is the virus on my clothes, my shoes, my hair, my newspaper?
Yes.
We asked the experts to answer questions about all the places coronavirus lurks or doesn't, and you'll feel better after reading this, and you really will, because it's like not everywhere. You don't have to worry about somebody coughing on the back of your head and then touching the back of your head and then touching your nose under your mask, and then somehow you're going to get it.
Don't do that.
Could it happen? Yeah, but like for the most part, that's like not what happens.
All right. Well, that's probably true, but don't try it and prove it. But yeah, it's not a big pea soup of virus out there that you're going to walk through and get killed.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my segment for today. We'll come up with something for tomorrow because, maybe we'll be at war with Iran, and maybe we were always at war with Iran, and maybe North Korea will fall apart, and maybe it won't. I will leave you with this one, though, because I think it's interesting in watching the 5 o'clock volleys every day. That's a line from Vietnam that I think we should bring back. Why Donald Trump Can't Stand Tough Women Journalists by Molly Jong-Fast. Maybe the former reality TV host feels a little threatened by tough women who don't follow the script the way women should. Scare quotes around should. It's possible.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first time, for example, that when the President of the United States said to CBS, Wei Zhejiang, nice and easy, just relax, lower your voice.
Yeah.
It wasn't the first
Don't
time
tell
the President
anybody
had
I
been
grabbed
inappropriate
you.
with a female reporter. It wasn't even the first time that week the President had acted out on a female reporter.
He's the worst.
Right? Now, some of Trump's defenders will point to the lame excuse that he's terrible to all journalists.
Yeah, that is lame.
Right? Like he told Peter Alexander, you're a terrible reporter. He said that
did
to other
do
people
that.
as well.
He has.
He said that to John Carl, who's like president of the White House Correspondents Association. You'll never get anywhere in your profession. You're so stupid.
Yeah. Sometimes he is. But
Right.
he has.
But it's
gotten
not the same,
somewhere.
Molly says. Trump may be crappy to all journalists, but he treats women like low IQ, attractive nuisances that he might want to have sex with if they didn't talk so much.
Yeah.
Some female journalists delight him. Actually, only one, really. It's OAN's Chanel Rion, who asks hard-hitting questions like, Mr. President, do you consider the term Chinese food to be racist because it's food that originated from China?
Right.
Tuesday night, she asked Trump, no lie, to comment on the poll showing massive, almost perfect support for his immigration order.
Okay.
Now, this is a woman journalist the president can support.
Yes. And Squire around at Sarzalago as well. We've got some pictures of that.
But Trump's daily grievance session seemed to devolve into him just yelling insults at reporters who ask him questions he doesn't like. But women journalists are subjected to a whole other level of dehumanization, and women of color are antagonized at an even more profoundly humiliating level. He told Yamiche Alcindor to be nice.
Right.
Trump tends to act out on women journalists when things aren't going his way, and a brutal pandemic killing 45,000 Americans, followed by a crash of his beloved Dow, is a case of things not going Trump's way in a big way.
Yeah.
So last week, he attacked Maggie Haberman twice.
Sure. Well, why not? She likes it.
Right? Then he went on a long rant about Haberman and said she should give back her Pulitzer. In fact, it turned out the crime was committed by the other side. The crime was not committed by this side.
Yes.
They got
that was really something.
Maggie Haberman gets a Pulitzer Prize. She's a third-rate reporter in the New York Times. And we put her name up here last week. You saw that. People thought it was a commercial. It wasn't a commercial. It was just clips. So he's trying to make Haberman the story, and that should come as no surprise, Molly writes. I'm always reticent to say the president is doing things intentionally because he's largely animalistic in his instincts. It's probable that Trump is just a racist and a misogynist, and his base interprets his inability to hide this as refreshing honesty. But it's impossible to know what goes on in the president's goldfish-sized brain. Fundamentally, Trump only cares about two things, kleptocracy and winning.
Who said that?
Lee Jong-Fast.
Okay. That's better.
Daily briefing to replace with Trump to create a villain, find a woman, preferably of color, and deem her rude or badly behaved.
Yes.
Demon pass here.
Rude is.
By disparaging women journalists,
Forgot that.
fighting with them, and treating them like children, he sends his base a very clear signal, and the signal resonates whether they admit it or not. And it does. There's some recent
Children
polling
that
out
he
showing
molests.
the respect for the media has dropped, particularly among Republicans. We know why that is.
Yeah. Well, he's leading the charge, certainly.
So important to point out, even as we decry it.
Okay. Yes, I'll do that. I'm willing to do that. Yeah, and I see more of the same pushback I've noticed in a couple of the last couple of days as well, with reporters getting once again upset with people saying that they would do White House reporting differently, and why don't reporters walk out on the president or tell him not to speak to them that way and refuse to participate, but. No news in their answers either. It's just the same old, same old. But I just wanted to let you know that reporters were upset that people were saying that they weren't entirely satisfied with the job they were doing. This was always possible, but only Twitter makes it possible or convenient for them to read that feedback as opposed to accidentally hearing it on the subway or something like that.
There you go. So
All right.
Abby's telling us we got some
Excellent.
stuff to do with tattoo here, so we're going to go do that.
Okay.
But it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'll be
you
back
as
tomorrow,
well.
and we'll do it again.
All right. Very good. Abby's welcome tomorrow as well, and we'll check in with you then. I bet we'll still have coronavirus going around at that point.
We'll also have
plenty to
Trump
talk
yelling
about.
at women reporters.
Right.
Take care. And
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Do the same. Okay. Woof as well. I just wanted to let you know that, Abby. I went out and learned that little bit of dog just for you, just to make you feel welcome here. Okay. Let's head back into Pocket and into the Twitter feed to see what might be going on. Let's see. I've got a couple of things I have socked away. We did mention that there are one or two competing theories about Brian Kemp's interest in reopening the state, and reopening the state in some fairly stupid ways, too. And so people are trying to dissect some of that. The weird list of businesses that were singled out for reopening is a little odd. That led to a lot of theorizing as well. I think this tweet that I have here, somewhere in here, has buried this weird list, right? As I mentioned, we were able to call out some of them. Gyms, and it lists separately fitness centers, which I think of as under the heading of gyms. But bowling alleys has puzzled everyone. Body art studios, we spent a little time on yesterday. Barbers, cosmetologists, hair designers, nail care artists. That's another new term I really wasn't aware of. Estheticians, is that, how is this different from any of the previously named groups, minus bowling alleys, I suppose. But also, and it says their respective schools. So I guess schools training hair designers, nail care artists, body art studios, fitness center personnel, etc., and also massage therapists. But one theory I saw circulating was, and I don't remember where this one came from, so I can't credit it properly, but probably a lot of people passing this one around, that those businesses, well, one theory was that those businesses are located most frequently essentially in rental spaces, and ordinarily strip malls, etc., though not necessarily always the case. But they are the occupants typically of rental properties, and that if so long as the closure orders, the stay-at-home orders are in place in many states, and I think Georgia possibly among them, there is, and I'm sure Georgia was reluctant to join in, but in some of the more progressive locales, and I think pretty much everywhere now, there were prohibitions against foreclosures and evictions, etc., such that these businesses that were closed and therefore couldn't pay their April rent were not evicted from their business premises. Not that they could have removed their stuff from there anyway, since they were staying at home. But the idea was they got a pass on not being able to pay their rent at this point. And then I guess the rental property, the business rental property owners, it was theorized, had gotten to him and said, well, look, if you lift the stay-at-home order, then they can go back to work and earn and pay their rent for us. Or at the very least, we would no longer be prohibited under the emergency orders from evicting them from the premises if they think it's unsafe to go back to work and earn and therefore pay us. Then at least we won't be blocked by the emergency order anymore. That's a possibility. Also, one or two competing theories, but maybe complementary theories, about the state's hope of avoiding excessive unemployment benefit payments. Let's see. Let's see if we can fit it in here before our break. I happened to see this one retweeted into my timeline by Lindsay Beyerstein, who says that what she has here from Aisha Saeed is a very incisive analysis of Kemp's likely motivation for sending the most vulnerable workers back to work. That would be to avoid paying unemployment insurance, which would bankrupt the state's UI fund, which in turn cannot be replenished with tax hikes without a constitutional amendment. That's the way they've set things up for themselves down there in Georgia, because smart or whatever. Aisha C. Saeed is identified here in her Twitter profile as the author of Amal Unbound, a New York Times bestseller. And let's see what she has. Oh, she's great. Oh, look at this. This has an even longer chain here. She's thanking, let's see, somebody else who's labeled here in her tweet as Neon Flag. That's a Twitter handle for George Chidi, Chidi, which I hope I've pronounced correctly, but it might be Chidi, I'm not sure. And George's Facebook entry explains the situation in such a cogent fashion that it caught Lindsay's eye. You really want to know what I think about rescinding shelter in place in the way this order is structured? It's about making sure people can't file unemployment. It isn't about saving lives, certainly. It's not about the peak of the curve. I think lots of people are going to ignore the governor and stay home regardless. And that's a good idea, really, but maybe not financially. This isn't the decision being driven by epidemiology. It's the rawest and most lethal of political decisions, and it will kill people. Kemp is looking forward to the fiscal discussion in 2021 and 2022, when all of this really starts to hit. He got elected by out-yahooing the field, and I'm not certain he did get elected, or certainly not by doing it that way. His base has been trained to view government spending as a crime, and he knows that he becomes politically vulnerable to an attack if he raises taxes. He's not capable of delivering a nuanced message around necessity because his base doesn't know how to hear it. The state is staring at 1 million unemployment applications. It probably cannot pay those over 6 months. The unemployment fund has a reserve of about $2.6 billion, and last week it paid out about $42 million, which is about 3 times as much as it usually does. That figure will double in 2 weeks, give or take, maybe more. At that rate, the fund is empty after about 28 weeks, probably less. Even if things improve later, that fund will run dry in a year because unemployment isn't going to return to 5% for a long time. There's a little bit more to it. We'll continue after this. Welcome back now to Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio, gathering a little more intel on the Brian Kemp decision. But let's go back to, where did I put aside the Facebook entry again from George Chidi, who started out by saying, yeah, it's likely that Kemp is staring at the size of the Georgia Unemployment Insurance Fund and the number of claims that are being made. And, of course, people are only entitled to claim that they are temporarily unemployed if their place of employment is closed, and if he rescinds the closure orders. Although I find it difficult to believe that the odd combination of gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, body art studios, barbers, cosmetologists. This is all recited in this Facebook post once again later on. But could that really account for such a significant number of the unemployed that they can make the finances work? I'm sure lots of people are employed that way, but can they make the finances of unemployment insurance work if those people are back at work? I don't know if that does the trick. But at any rate, there's lots of different perspectives on this. He continues on by saying Georgians did the Kansas thing a couple of years ago, which is to say that they instituted a hard constitutional limit on income taxes of 6%. It cannot go higher without amending the state constitution. What that means is that there's no easy mechanism for the state to accommodate an extraordinary expense like this without somehow telling Republican reactionaries that they must raise taxes. Those reactionaries are the ones who will be protesting in front of the State House on Friday when this order goes into effect. What will they be protesting if it goes into effect that day? They'll be celebrating it, I guess, but if they want to protest it, fine, sure, go ahead and do that. If there is no state order calling for businesses to be closed, then the people who are unemployed can no longer claim that their unemployment is involuntary, even if it would be utter idiocy for them to return to work. a hairdresser or a massage therapist cannot maintain social distance. But they can certainly file for relief unless the law says that they can work. And then here the list again. Gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, body art studios, barbers, cosmetologists, hair designers, nail care artists, estheticians, I still can't pronounce this apparently, and their respective schools and massage therapists, which is a weird way of doing all this list. The respective schools, I'm not even sure what that's, all right, whatever. Anyway, that's the quote. And Brian Kemp, I guess, must have that been the one they were quoting there. So it's his fault for this stilted and weird language. George then goes on to comment, not banks, although they think they're already open, right? Not software firms, not factories, not schools. It is no coincidence, George continues, that the businesses on this list are staffed by relatively poor people, because that's who he wants off the unemployment rolls. And if they die, well, they're mostly black people or Asian and poor, and an acceptable political loss for a Republican governor. The purpose of this isn't to open up these businesses, it's to get these workers off the dole. Work and die. Or don't work, but you're on your own if you don't. Because we can't raise taxes to cover the time you spent trying to save your life and the lives of people around you. That is a scary prospect. Empty Wheel this morning has been busy reminding people of what her take on this is. She says via Twitter this morning, and then attaches her write-up of it, I really think Brian Kemp is getting a pass on the racist implications of his reopening order. He even implied that if we just ignore the black people who died in Albany, Georgia, the death rate is not that bad. I didn't hear him do it. Not that I would have listened to him do anything. But here's her write-up on it. Brian Kemp suggests workers at nail salons don't own their own lives. Which would make them not their own, in fact. But anyway, Brian Kemp suggests workers at nail salons don't own their own lives is her post from earlier this morning. Fox News' Martha McCallum did a good job last night pushing Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to justify his order to reopen non-essential businesses like hair and nail salons and gyms. And by the way, Georgians just don't really end up looking all that good as a result of having them open anyway, quite honestly. But I imagine it's better aesthetically when they are open, even if all the people are dead. But okay. The order supersedes any citywide orders, meaning even devastated cities like Albany must comply. The entire thing is worth watching. The same guy who claimed neither he nor his health commissioner understood that COVID-19 can be spread by asymptomatic people 3 weeks ago. Is it really that long ago? And in this clip, suggests temperature screening could be effective to stop the spread. Now claims that, quote, our people in our state have learned a lot. We've all learned how to do social distancing. And that'll be enough to open businesses that require close proximity for extended periods. Doesn't make any sense, but whatever. He also suggested that the data on Georgia cases and fatalities are dated by as much as 6 days, meaning he's claiming that Georgia has already passed its peak. But the real tell came when he explained that, and here, I guess, quote from the clip, we're talking about a few businesses that I closed down to help flatten the curve, which we have done in our state. They haven't. But for us to continue to ask them to do that while they lose everything, quite honestly, that there are a lot of civil repercussions to that. When you close somebody's business down and take the livelihood of that individual and those employees, and they are literally at the face of losing everything, at the face of losing everything, yes, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, sure. Well, Marcy continues on. Kemp treats small businesses, not life itself, as everything. And he doesn't consider that for people who work in these small businesses, their health and their life is what they own. Effectively, he's stripping them of their ability to work in safety. And, as many people have suggested, he's also stripping people who choose not to work in unsafe conditions of unemployment benefits. Kemp went on to suggest that if you take Albany out of the situation right now, our state is a much different place, correctly noting that it has more deaths, but not more cases, than Atlanta. But in making the suggestion, imagining he could take Georgia's rural black population out of the state's general condition. Kemp cited Trump repeatedly in his interview, even claiming that this move complies with his guidelines on reopening. It's being done before cases decline adequately and in businesses not even included in Trump's irresponsible list, which does include gyms. He didn't, however, say that if the Trump administration hadn't botched the PPP, then these small businesses wouldn't have to choose between reopening or their lives. So conveniently left that one out for us. But thanks for Marcy for bringing that one back up. All right, got a couple other stories to get to, plus some comments that have come in via the Twitter machines as well. And let's see. First of all, well, where should I go first? Well, let's see. We'll do them in reverse order. Kate Cheryl asking the question. Let's see if we have an answer. Is Kemp reopening the restaurants? I have not seen that on the lists. I'm guessing no. That is a good guess. Because of the heft up way they are paid, unemployment for restaurant wait staff is cheap. That's true. I know a full-time waitress here in Indiana whose unemployment payment is only $69 per week. That's true because I guess they register only their base salary, and because wait staff depend almost entirely on tips for the bulk of their income, these tipped employees, we've discussed this before in terms of like minimum wage issues. Restaurant owners always want to be exempted from that, and if we have to pay our wait staff $15 an hour or even whatever the minimum wage is in their state, if they're well below $15 an hour, well, they make all this money in tips. Why should we have to do all of this? Well, when it comes time to file for unemployment and they ask you how much did you make, the answer is $2.15 an hour. The rest is tips and unpredictable, and that's not includable in figuring out what your unemployment benefits are, so you get next to nothing. So restaurants not open, although that's good news for the spread of the disease probably. But, yeah, good point. Why not the restaurants? And that's the thing that probably more people miss the restaurants being open. Donald Trump certainly thinks so. Than the hair salons, and certainly the bowling alleys, I would guess. But who knows? But yeah, that may be a good reason why they are not yet in the count. Ricky May tells us, reminds us essentially, very gently, that there's a story we've been ignoring from north of the border. I have a story tucked away about it from the other day. We have to apologize to the Canadians for spreading the disease north of the border. Not the disease of coronavirus, but the disease of mass shootings. We haven't had a moment to turn to the fact that there was a disastrous mass shooting in Nova Scotia just the other day. Let me jump back into Pocket and see if I can't find the report I put. Even that ended up getting buried, and I'm sorry that that's the case. And you know what? As a matter of fact, I don't even know how far back I would have to scroll to find it. But that's the case. And as I understand, the top of my head recollection was 12. Was it right? 12 people, or was it 16? For some reason now both numbers are in my head. Killed, not including the gunman, who they don't count in the total there. I know I retweeted the story, so I can always go back to my tweet stream to try and find it. Let's see. But as I recall, let me find it for you. I'm sorry. This is I'm sorry that it's not at the ready. Just, I guess, another amazing tidbit around the idea of mass shootings becoming routine. Here in the United States, I'm sure we would likely have ignored it as well, but the fact that it was in Canada just made it all too easy. All right, let's see. I've got this story through Twitter from Politico, and so I don't have a local angle on it. And Ricky, if you feel like sharing one, by all means, go ahead and do so. There's the number 16. Gunman kills at least 16, including an officer in Nova Scotia. The death toll makes it the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history, which I'm glad that you haven't had enough of them to have massive death toll mass shootings like we have. But 16 is painful anywhere. A lone gunman disguised as law enforcement, that made it all the worse, stormed across Nova Scotia over a 2-day period, killing 16 people, including an officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, would be the easier abbreviation, but I'm sure they use that later. It's the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history. The suspect left victims scattered across multiple crime scenes in different communities during a rampage that stretched from late Saturday into Sunday, said Chris Leather, Chief Superintendent of the Nova Scotia RCMP, and RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year veteran of the force, was killed and another officer injured while pursuing the suspect, Leather told reporters on Sunday. I guess we don't want to give any infamy here or undue publicity to the gunman. He is identified here, a 51-year-old man. He's dead. There was at least one exchange of gunfire between the suspect and police. The RCMP spokesman says the figure of 16 does not include the gunman. And, it's I don't have much more in the way of particulars on this. Politico made mention of it in, basically in passing, and I'm sure the in-depth reporting locally has much more to add. But we must at least stop to take note of this. Ricky says, I guess there's updated figures here. 22 killed, 16 different crime scenes. I don't know. I guess Politico got it wrong in their headline there. And you could be forgiven, obviously, for commenting as he did. She says, I have to admit I haven't been really paying attention to American politics because the Nova Scotia shootings have been dominating this. Now we got 23 victims, according to Brian Monroe, who sends another news story, and this one with at least with a Canadian source here. Let me take a quick look here. Death toll climbs to 23. Police say they're in the midst of a detailed and complex investigation at 16 crime scenes. And I don't know, is everybody, how do you investigate a number that many crime scenes out there? Are they all wearing masks doing it? Is that not an issue for the area? I'm not criticizing. I'm just sort of curious about whether the coronavirus pandemic makes the investigation more difficult or not. Police say they're in the middle of this massive, detailed, and complex investigation at 16 crime scenes, which include 5 burned buildings and are spread across the communities of, I'm not even going to try. Portapique, is that correct? Wentworth, Debert, maybe, D-E-B-E-R-T, Debert, I don't know which one it's going to be. I should never have gotten into this. We'll skip the names of the towns only because I'm going to bet on it being less disrespectful to skip than to mangle at this point. Police have said some of the victims were known to the suspect, but some were not. So some random, some not. Believed to be committed by one person alone. That's good. There's nobody else believed to be on the loose still. Is there more to call out of this? I mean, other than to note the fact that, we've spread that horrible disease of mass shootings and crime sprees northward, which I guess was inevitable at some level. But apologies for not bringing it up sooner, and condolences all around. I mean, I'm not going to throw you the lame line of thoughts and prayers. I'll just say, that's kind of our fault. Giving your lunatics our ideas about how to act out. Anyway, duly noted, I think. We'll keep an eye on things. I got all the names right? Is that right? Okay. Ricky says we got the names correct, so that's good news. Maybe I'll have more guts and try it again next time if there's further reporting on the situation. Let's see. Okay. I think I'll move on from here, although, well, if there's strong interest in hearing more about this from our Canadian contingent, we'll see about adding more of that as time goes on. Let me see if I can't jump back now to the other things I've had in store in pocket, and maybe we can dive a little deeper into our backlog. Another big story that we haven't touched, and seems like an oversight at this point, speaking of oversight, the Senate Intelligence Committee has released a fourth report, now another bipartisan Senate report. And remember, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Senate is Republican majority, and so same will obtain, of course, on the Intelligence Committee. And yet, Republicans would have then had to give their assent to the issuance of this additional, rather damning report, although it should be noted that it is also very heavily redacted, and that some of the most heavily redacted portions are those that detail Vladimir Putin's role in interfering with the 2016 election. Very interesting. Let me grab the CNN write-up of it. The report itself is available in full in PDF form, redacted, of course, online, but it's a 185 or so page report, and I have not yet had a chance to dive through it. Others are doing a much better job at that. One of the early looks at it came from this CNN write-up. Bipartisan Senate report backs Intel community assessment that Russia interfered to help Trump in the 2016 election. Mind you, that it has once again become an important part of Trump's routine at his stupid, non-informative press conference performances every day to insist, as Greg reminded you, that people like Maggie Haberman should have to give back their Pulitzer Prizes because they got the story wrong. I don't think we got the full context of his complaint when Greg was referencing it this time. I think we might have talked about it a little bit earlier in the week, though, that his insistence is that the New York Times and the reporters there should return their Pulitzer Prizes to where? I don't know. Store them with the hydroxychloroquine we bought, I guess. But the idea being they got the story of Russian interference in the election wrong. And that's what Greg was saying when they got it wrong. The crime was committed by the other side. This was Trump's claim the other day. They got it so wrong, did the New York Times, that they even reversed the names of the parties who were guilty of accepting Russian interference. It was, in fact, the Democratic Party that invited the Russians to interfere in the election such that they would lose, you see. It was a brilliant plan to hand over all three branches of the government, essentially, to Republican control forever and for several decades at the minimum on the Supreme Court. So, yeah, we all missed out on that one. But here the bipartisan Senate report says, no, as it happens, you may not have heard this, but the Russians actually helped the Republican campaign in this one. I know that's a big surprise to you. Jeremy Herb and Zachary Cohen, for CNN on this story. A bipartisan report from the Senate Intelligence Committee released on Tuesday has backed the U.S. intelligence community's conclusion that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election to help then-candidate Donald Trump. What? No way. The committee's findings are a rebuke to Trump's frequent claims of a hoax that Russia was trying to help him win and the president's attacks on the intelligence community. The panel concluded that the Obama administration's assessment on Russian election interference was crafted without political bias, undercutting the president's claims that officials like former CIA Director John Brennan and DNI James Clapper were using the intelligence community to attack him. Senate Intelligence Chairman Richard Burr, who's still a traitor, said in a statement that the assessment reflected strong tradecraft and sound analytical reasoning. The committee found no reason to dispute the intelligence community's conclusions, the North Carolina Republican said. The committee has previously summarized its findings that the intelligence assessment was supported by, but the 156-page report included new details and a lot of redactions on how the committee reached that conclusion. You know I love the how they did it stories, if it actually reports how they did it, not just simply that they did it. The report pushed back against the findings of House Intelligence Committee Republicans who raised the issues in 2018 with how the intelligence assessment was reached that Russian President Vladimir Putin was trying to help Trump. The committee's bipartisan investigation into Russian election interference began more than 3 years ago. The committee has released 4 volumes and is finishing work on the final chapter, which will include the committee's investigation into contacts between members of Trump's team and Russian officials. That volume is in its final editing stages, according to a source familiar with the matter, and is currently around 950 pages, including footnotes, but not appendices. Wow. Trump has distrusted the intelligence community since he took office, and even before, of course, and the intelligence community assessment released days before he was sworn in is a major factor. But not all of it, I think. But the committee defended the intelligence community's work. It warned Russia was likely to try to interfere in 2020, saying that the ICA provided an important conclusion. Is that the intelligence community? IC, but what's the A for? I don't know. The ICA provided an important conclusion that Russia's aggressive interference efforts should be considered the new normal, another new normal alongside this pandemic. There is certainly no reason to doubt that Russians' success in 2016 is leading them to try again in 2020, and we must not be caught unprepared, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the panel's top Democrat, said in a statement. The committee also addressed the allegations contained in the opposition research dossier written by ex-British intelligence agent Christopher Steele, remember him? Which Republicans have pointed to in an effort to discredit the FBI and special counsel investigations into Trump and Russia. The panel found that the information provided by Christopher Steele to the FBI was not used in the body of the intelligence community's assessment or to support any of its analytic judgments. Is that it? ICA, Intelligence Community Assessment? Yeah, maybe. All right. The report explains there was a debate over what to do with the Steele material, which the FBI had been provided. The decision was made to include a 2-page annex to the classified version of the assessment, which was briefed to the president-elect by FBI Director James Comey in January of 2017. The committee interviewed senior officials in the Obama administration involved with the assessment, as well as the officials who helped put it together. Every witness interviewed, the committee said, saw no attempts or pressure to politicize the findings. The same day that the report was released, Attorney General William Barr said on a conservative radio show that he's been, quote, very troubled by findings presented to him so far by John Durham, the federal prosecutor who's investigating the origins of the Russia investigation. Haven't heard anything from that guy in a long time. So much the better, I say. Barr's tone about the FBI's Russia investigation, which helped inform the intelligence assessment, contrasted with what the committee had released. Believe it or not. I wouldn't use the word shocked, Barr told conservative radio host Hugh Hewitt in an interview Tuesday. I'm very troubled by it, but I think the reason that we have this investigation is because there are a lot of things that are unexplained, and I think we're getting deeply into the situation, and we'll be able to sort out exactly what happened. That was nonsense and meant nothing. Barr said that any public presentation of Durham's findings was not imminent, and that the timeline of the investigation was not restricted by unofficial Justice Department guidelines around the release of certain information ahead of an election. Aha! So that's what Durham is doing. He's sitting on his hands until they can bring it out as an October surprise. They won't be following that guideline after all. What do you know? The Intelligence Committee report itself, meanwhile, was heavily redacted, with entire sections remaining classified, including much of the detailing of the intelligence community's assessment that Russia was trying to help Trump. Well, that sounds like an important part of it, don't you think? In the section on Putin ordering the campaign to influence the U.S. election, a single line is unredacted. That's it. And I guess the line is, the committee found that reporting from multiple intelligence disciplines was used as evidence to support this analytic line, and that the analytic tradecraft was transparent. They won't tell you what they found, what they concluded, just that the finding was sound, and maybe that's all we are ever going to get on that one. The Intelligence Committee report explains there was a difference in confidence levels on that assessment between the CIA and the FBI, which had high confidence, and the National Security Agency, which had moderate confidence. At least it wasn't low. The committee finds that the analytic disagreement was reasonable, transparent, and openly debated among the agencies and analysts, with analysts, managers, and agency heads on both sides of the confidence level reasonably justifying their positions. That's the end of the story as far as we have for the write-up. We'll see what the political fallout is in the days to come, but I have a feeling that they'll be able to use the pandemic to distract from that, and vice versa if necessary. We'll see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. So many questions about where to go next, and such an eclectic mix of things to do. Let's change gears just briefly, anyway, to bring you back up to speed with a story we shared, some weeks ago, pre-pandemic, I guess, when I let you know that fellow listener and Daily Kos and Twitter denizen Blair Reeves had been working on putting together a political project in state politics in North Carolina since Richard Burr's name came up. It reminded me that I had this note from Blair that a new post went up recently at Daily Kos, which I'd like to call to your attention, especially if you are in North Carolina or just keeping an eye on North Carolina from elsewhere. An update that says our project to break the Republican majority in North Carolina continues, and you'll be able to find out what you can do to help out in breaking that majority. Back in January, Blair reminds everybody, we blogged about the launch of the longleaf pine slate, right? Longleaf pine slate. That's where you can find it. Search that term on Daily Kos if you want to turn this one up. You can, of course, find the link in our roundup later in the afternoon. But the Longleaf Pine Slate, of course, a project dedicated to breaking the rigged and corrupt Republican majority in the North Carolina General Assembly. We decided to target 11 of the strongest Democratic challengers running for newly vulnerable Republican-held seats. That is, target them for support. I know sometimes we worry about what that means, but okay, becomes obvious. These candidates are Democrats' path to victory this November. Most of the races that we absolutely must win to take back the majority. I'm proud to say that now, with this community's help, the Longleaf Pine Slate has raised tens of thousands of dollars for our candidates, and we're just getting started. Here's the problem we wanted to address. If you're not an avid North Carolina politics nerd, it can be hard to figure out where your support is most needed. After all, there are literally hundreds of candidates running, and they all need money. For candidates, it's very hard to break through the noise. For donors, it's also difficult to know who to support unless you dig into a lot of time-consuming analysis, and that's why we put together this list of the most critical North Carolina legislative races. If you want to put your political contribution dollars where they're most needed, this is it. By the way, Longleaf Pine Slate is not another PAC. Instead, it's just using Act Blue and the Act Blue dashboard and directs all the contributions directly to the candidates. So another great model there, and thank God for Act Blue, and I think everybody here can agree with that one. So here's where we stand. With the advantage of first quarter fundraising data, we now have a better idea of how our candidates are doing. I'm pleased to say, says Blair, that the candidates of the Longleaf Pine Slate, like Democrats statewide, are raising the money they need to compete, but we're still being outraised by the other side. corporate interests are greatly stepping up their contributions to help protect the Republican majority. In these tables, provided underneath here, Republican versus Democratic funds advantage stands for the Republican edge in fundraising. All totals are cash on hand at the end of the first quarter, and it's broken down by the House and Senate races that they're watching, identified by district, the name of the two candidates there, and the advantage posted by Republicans. And generally speaking, it is Republicans typically with the advantage, but not everywhere. But you'll be able to take a look at which races need particular help. As you can see, there are several races in House Districts 9 and 59, and Senate Districts 7 and 24 in particular, where Republican incumbents have accumulated a significant cash advantage. Time to panic, right? Well, no. The numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Blair reminds us Democrats have reason for real optimism here, and when you look a little deeper, you can see big weaknesses in these Republican incumbents. And it's broken down here for, there's a paragraph or two on each of these districts. In House District 9, Perrin Jones, let's scroll up and take a look at how things are situated there. Perrin Jones in 9th District was appointed a Republican to replace Greg Murphy, who won the special election for Congress after the death of Walter Jones. Greg Murphy, I guess now in Congress. Perrin, though, has never won an election himself. One of Jones's main advantages as a candidate has been his personal resources. He's spent heavily on his own campaign. Fundraising looks formidable until you realize that a large majority of it hasn't been from people, much less voters. It's been from corporate healthcare PACs. In the first quarter, his opponent, what's the full name here? I'll run it. Brian Farkas, not Scott Farkas, but Brian Farkas, you see, dramatically outraised Jones among actual humans, while Jones, I guess they must have run against one another before, raised 75% of his total haul from PACs. His figure last year was 50%. Despite the disparity in their bank accounts, Farkas is still sitting on a significant amount of cash and is working much harder than Jones leading up to November. This district changed in the 2019 redrawing, making Farkas a real contender. Okay. That is a bit, that's got me a little confused about who's doing what in that one. But you get the idea of the level of detail here that is offered for each of these key races, in particular these four that are in focus. So, about that corporate PAC money, are you curious where it's coming from? Well, there's a short list of industry special interests giving heavily to protect the Republican majority. Of course, there's Duke Energy, infamous name for a lot of us who have at least tangentially followed North Carolina politics for some time. They have given to both sides, but of course strongly favor the leaders of the party in the majority, which, of course, if the majority were in Democratic hands, we would see where Duke Energy's allegiances lie, perhaps. Also interesting, anesthesiologists. There are no fewer than 7 active PACs representing anesthesiologists in North Carolina. They give overwhelmingly to Republican candidates, as does there's also a heavy presence of the optometric. Is it optometric, do we say? Optometrists, but are they optometrics? Their PAC, Hospital Association PAC, North Carolina Medical Society PAC, North Carolina Hospital Association PAC. While some of these healthcare industry PACs give to both sides, they generally favor Republicans as well. Maybe, I wonder if the pandemic changes any of that. And, of course, the North Carolina Realtors PAC, curiously influential PAC, who give to everyone, but again, prefer the party in power. Are you sensing a pattern? Lots of industry PACs just prefer to give to the party in power, since they're the ones with the juice to make regulatory changes that those industries want. With a hearty investment in the Republican majority, they're loath to abandon it. And it may come as no surprise that the healthcare industry is also investing heavily in protecting their Republican allies. This is directly linked to Republican opposition to Medicaid expansion. Increasing access to affordable health care would be a boon to hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians, but it would also result in many of them quitting their much more expensive private insurance. If you're a for-profit hospital chain or a medical specialist who makes way more money from private insurance than Medicaid, you probably don't like that. So that's why you're going to start sending big checks from wealthy physicians to Republicans, including particularly Perrin Jones, the aforementioned Perrin Jones. Oh, that's what you're looking at here. So just a reminder to check in on the longleaf pine slate, whether you are in North Carolina or in the area, or just want to try and seed some efforts that are strategically placed and might in fact tip the balance from Republican to Democrat in the state legislature in a key sort of swingy kind of state. Maybe the purpling of Virginia can flow southward and into North Carolina and establish a new beachhead there. And we thank Blair for the work that's being done. And just wanted to let you all know, just to shift gears, it's not all coronavirus, piracy, and disaster news. But if you want, by the way, to lower the amount of coronavirus and PPE disaster and grifting news, if you want to change the mix, well, one good way would be to replace the Republican regime both in the states and the federal government come November. So speaking of those two things, where to go to next? Let's see. I want to take note for the record, just because I like collecting this information for all of us to ponder about trying to figure out the puzzle of COVID-19. I won't read the entirety of the article, but something worth noting from The Guardian, where we find out that air pollution may be a, quote, key contributor to COVID-19 deaths, according to this study. Research shows that almost 80% of deaths across 4 countries were in the most polluted regions. And I guess that stands to reason, given the major part in the disease and the death that it causes that resides in the respiratory tracts. But high levels of air pollution may be one of the most important contributors to deaths from COVID-19, according to this research. The analysis shows that of the coronavirus deaths across 66 administrative regions of Italy, Spain, France, and Germany, 78% of them occurred in just 5 regions, and that these were the most polluted. They may also be the most densely populated, I'm not sure, but I think they actually address some of this. The research examined levels of nitrogen dioxide, a pollutant produced mostly by diesel vehicles, and weather conditions that can prevent dirty air from dispersing away from a city. Many studies have linked nitrogen dioxide exposure to health damage, and particularly lung disease, which could make people more likely to die if they contract COVID-19. The results indicate that long-term exposure to this pollutant may be one of the most important contributors to fatality caused by the COVID-19 virus in those regions and maybe across the whole world, said Yaron Ogen at Martin Luther University, Halle-Wittenberg in Germany, who conducted the research. Poisoning our environment means poisoning our own body, and when it experiences chronic respiratory stress, its ability to defend itself from infections is limited. Stands to reason, I think. Just another one of those things to throw out there for your consideration. Not that you're going to be able to clean up the air pollution in your city to try and help yourself at this point, but well worth keeping an eye on as we try to figure out this puzzle of why it strikes the way it does and where it does. Let me throw another item into the mix here as well. Another food plant closure noted by the Daily Beast just a few days ago. Let's see. Whoops, I got to get rid of the pop-up ads first. April 18th, noting virus-addled meat packing plant in Colorado had a work-while-sick culture, authorities say. JBS is the name of the plant here. JBS shut their beef processing operation on April 15th, but not before dozens of workers became infected and at least 4 died. So add that to South Dakota's Smithfield pork plants and elsewhere. their Smithfield plant's closing because of sick workers. Now, beef processing plant in Colorado. Just to give you some of the details without going too far into it, a work while sick culture may have turned a Colorado meatpacking plant into a COVID-19 cluster. Communications from local health authorities suggest. The Weld County Department of Public Health and Environment sent a letter to JBS USA facility in Greeley on April 4th and referenced warnings the agency had made to company officials on April 2nd, 5 days before the first reported death of one of the facility's employees on April 7th. JBS idled the beef processing operation on April 15th, but not before dozens of its more than 4,500 workers became infected and at least 4 died. So numbers comparable in terms of staff to the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, but 4 dead there, rather as opposed to 1, thankfully so far, on the Roosevelt. So just keeping an eye on that, and of course reminding people that we're going to depend on these workers and their ability at some level to keep working, but we have to be able to see to it that they can do so safely. And our ability to do that is compromised. I got another report here. Let's see. It originates with The Hill. We'll see whether their reporting is thorough enough for us, but they bring up another important point in this chain here. USDA under pressure as food safety concerns grow. Yes, the United States Department of Agriculture, headed by another Trump sycophant, is unable to keep up with the demand for inspections in the pandemic environment. The USDA is facing growing pressure to ensure the safety of the nation's food supply during the coronavirus outbreak. Experts who spoke to The Hill stressed that the food supply was safe now. You have to say that, and I hope it's actually true. But they also pointed to growing challenges for the USDA as food industry workers fall sick and inspectors scramble for limited resources, questioning whether officials responsible for food supply safety are ready for the task at hand. Experts noted that the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service has recalled only 1 product over the last 2 months. On February, does that mean we're doing a good job or not? Well, I think the news is actually bad. On February 8th, a product from Family Traditions Meat Company, that just sounds like it's going to be infected, doesn't it? Was recalled due to misbranding. Maybe that's not so bad. And quite honestly, if my company was called Family Traditions Meat Company, I'd misbrand it too. But okay, there were no other recalls, though, until April 10th, when the USDA recalled chicken bowls from Conagra brands over possible foreign matter contamination and pork products from Jowett Farms for missing some inspections. Recalls, though, were flowing in regularly before February, with 5 in January, 4 in December, 4 in November, and 3 in October. You see? I mean, ordinarily, not having recalls might be considered a good thing. Good, everything is fine. It's on the up and up, but I think that they're trying to hint here that there were no recalls because there weren't enough people inspecting things to find the problems that are almost certainly there. Those who spoke to The Hill were careful to note that there were no signs food safety had been compromised during the pandemic, but urged officials to stay vigilant and found the gap in recalls puzzling. I do think that it's unusual that there were no recalls during that time frame, said Donald Schaffner, a professor of food microbiology at Rutgers University. You can study anything. COVID-19 has been a distraction, Schaffner added, but he cautioned that the pandemic has probably not directly impacted food safety yet. The point, of course, is we're beginning to worry about this, particularly if this goes on and on and on. At some point, closing the various processing plants that turn out to be clusters of disease themselves is going to add up. I mean, I do recall that at the beginning of our lockdown, I expected this to be the case. People, of course, preparing for long stretches at home or buying up as much of the groceries as they could, buying lots of meat and filling their freezers. And the shelves stayed empty for a while, but I have noticed certainly a lot less volume, even as things evened out and people stopped hoarding. it was still difficult to keep the meat section, certainly difficult to keep it as filled as you're used to seeing it. Never mind the toilet paper situation. Anyway, Benjamin Chapman, food safety extension specialist at, North Carolina State University, agreed that the outbreak could be a distraction with people off work or at home and more resources being devoted to the immediate pandemic response. Since COVID-19 is such a huge focus for everyone, not just the food industry, I can see how we all might be a bit distracted from the normal day-to-day operations of the food system, Chapman said, but I would say that in the short term, the distractions are likely not leading to changes in food safety. Still, the lack of recalls comes at a troubling time as concerns about food safety grow. Those worries have gained attention in recent days with the closing of meat processing plants where workers have contracted the virus. Pork processor Smithfield Foods closed 2 more plants. We heard about them, the ones we heard about in Cudahy, Wisconsin. Did we get that one right again? And Martin City, Missouri. And, of course, the Sioux Falls, South Dakota facility as well, where they had a death from coronavirus. 2 employees of Tyson's Foods, Columbus Junction, Iowa pork processing plant have also died. I don't think we had noted those deaths before. The risk from coronavirus will make it harder for USDA inspectors to continue their work, even at operating processing plants, experts said. As the coronavirus outbreak intensified in the U.S. in March, the agency said in a statement that it would ensure that grading and inspection personnel were available. It's more important than ever that we assure the American public that government and industry will take all steps necessary to ensure continued access to safe and wholesome USDA-inspected products, the statement added. USDA officials wrote a letter to stakeholders, not people who actually hold stakes, no, but stakeholders, that same month, saying that the department remains committed to working closely with industry to fulfill our mission of ensuring the safety. You get the idea. I don't have to read you the whole statement there. Another food safety agency, the Food and Drug Administration, has also seen its resources stretched with the outbreak and scaled back some routine inspection work to protect inspectors. I mean, you got to anticipate that, right? The USDA told The Hill it remains committed to ensuring food safety. Another statement that won't really help you to read, but they assure you they're going to do all that stuff, and we got to take their word for it at this point. I don't know what else we're going to do. The spotlight on the agency and its work is certain to intensify, particularly if more food service workers fall ill. Experts were hesitant to sound the alarm on the 2-month gap in recalls, noting the many factors that go into determining food recalls, but they acknowledged the challenges facing the USDA. I think we got the point of this one, and just wanted to throw that out there as another factor for you to consider in how this thing is going to play out long term and where we're going from here and whether we're going to have another round of this stuff and when it's going to happen and just how long can the supply chain hold out if there are so many points of attack available to this virus. The grocery store workers, restaurant workers, the food processing plant workers, the field workers, migrant, in particular the migrant field workers picking the produce. There's just too many places for this to break down. Plus, of course, now we'll be seeing all sorts of illness in body art studios and bowling alleys as well. And you know how essential they are to the distribution chain. All right. Enough about that. We have only a couple of minutes remaining, and I'm not sure where to go with this one. We'll save, I guess, for later in the week, another major story developing outside of the boundaries of the United States that we've been paying no attention to because we're normally pretty ethnocentric as it is, and coronavirus has only made it more so. But we need to check back in with the chaos in the UK as newspaper readers there learn just how enormously distracted from anything productive, certainly anything productive having to do with dealing with coronavirus pandemic, that Boris Johnson was at critical junctures. They're doing their job over there in the UK, discovering and revealing just how ill-prepared their leadership was and how they blew it. We just sort of assume that that's the case and go on from there. normalizing it for whatever reason. Let's see. What can we use the last couple minutes for? How about this one? Strange speculation we'll just throw in there. This, too, comes from The Hill. But you'll love it when I tell you I'm going to waste the last couple minutes on an op-ed piece. Not op, but analysis piece from Alan Dershowitz, of all sources. Not because I think it's particularly terrible or because I think he's worth reading, but because it's an interesting question, and he might not be totally wrong yet about this. He might even be right. Long-term thinking, once again, something people have wondered about, and now he's got an entry in this area. Who takes control if there is no presidential election this year? Asks Alan Dershowitz. And let's see what he has to say about it for just a few minutes before we wrap things up. What if the pandemic were to become so bad that the election could not be held? There is no acceptable reason for this to happen, since there are alternatives to voting in person on a single day, but it is possible, although unlikely, that voting by mail will be unrealistic if the pandemic were to get so much worse that it endangered the lives of postal workers, let's say. So, it's not too early to ask this question. What does the Constitution provide in the event that an emergency precludes an election before the end of a term of a president? Some of these questions we've answered before. It has never happened, and it will likely not happen this year, but law professors like hypotheticals, so here's my assessment. He's hoping you'll forget about his role in the impeachment by reading about this. We begin, of course, with the words of the Constitution. They provide no definitive answer, but they do provide some clear conclusions. Absent an election, the incumbent president does not continue to serve in an interim capacity until an election is finally held. Unlike parliamentary democracies such as Israel, he loves to throw that one in there, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has continued to serve until his replacement has been selected, the term of our president ends on a specific date, regardless of whether a successor is chosen. It's a good reminder and true. Indeed, the 20th Amendment says the terms of the president and vice president shall end at noon on January 20th. Nothing could seem clearer. Yet, the end of that paragraph provides that, quote, the terms of their successors shall then begin. But what if no successors have been elected? Does the president continue to serve as an interim office holder? No, because his or her term will definitely end. It's his right now, of course, at noon on January 20th. If not reelected, the president becomes a private citizen on that day. So who serves as president? The Constitution provides no solid answer. Unlike when a president is impeached or dies, there is no set succession plan for a situation with no election. The 20th Amendment speaks to the issue of when neither a president nor a vice president have been chosen, quote, before the time fixed for the beginning of his term, but it still refers to a somewhat different scenario. Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither or neither a president-elect nor a vice president-elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, or the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected, and such person shall act accordingly until a president or vice president shall have qualified. But if there's no election, there is no president-elect nor vice president-elect. Congress does provide for a line of succession to the White House if, by reason of death, resignation, removal from office, inability, or failure to qualify, there is neither a president nor a vice president. This also does not appear to encompass the absence of an election. There is an obvious gap in our Constitution, as the framers simply did not contemplate a no-election scenario. However, even if Congress has the authority to fill this gap in the Constitution, it is unclear that it has done so with the existing law, because the line of succession begins with the House Speaker. But there would be no House Speaker if there were no election, because there would be no House, all of whose members would be up for election in November. The terms of all the members of the House would end, as stated in the Constitution, on January 3rd. There would, however, be a Senate with a majority of its members not up for election in November and therefore still serving their terms. The continuing body theory, remember? This is important, as the next in line would be the president pro tempore of the Senate, Charles Grassley. However, if there were no election, there may be a Democratic majority among the remaining senators not up for election, unless sitting governors or state legislatures were allowed to fill the vacant seats, which is another issue. The longest-serving majority senator is traditionally handed the honor of serving as the president pro tem. Among Democrats, that would be Patrick Leahy, but a Democratic majority could choose any sitting senator for that role, including Elizabeth Warren or even Bernie Sanders, for that matter. If the succession law covers a missed election, which would be doubtful, then the senator selected to serve as president pro tem would become the next president. This thought is scary enough to Republicans to assure, in his mind anyway, that they will do everything they can to hold that election. The alternatives are unthinkable in a democracy. We would have a nation with no president and no working Congress, or an interim president who is not definitively authorized by the law. Because of the uncertainty of any alternative to voting, it is in the interest of both parties and all Americans to make sure that the election is held in a safe and timely manner. Well, we'd all love to have that. Will it work? I don't know.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, how about that? It will be up to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to bring you the new details on the news story of the earliest now identified coronavirus death, earlier than we thought, now in early February 6th, I believe, in California. We hinted at it. He'll bring you all the details on that and much more. Next.